All right, so I am here at the High Level Diner in South Edmonton, and I'm here with a special guest. We're having a bit of coffee, and then we're going to go for a little walk, and we're going to talk about someone that we both kind of think is pretty special. So stay tuned for that. I'll give you a little pan around the cafe here, and then I'm going to turn my camera on to my guest here, and she'll introduce herself. So here we go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pam Young. I'm a resident of Edmonton and of the Old Strathcona district, and we're going to be talking, as Cynthia mentioned, about a very special person who maybe none of you have ever heard of before. She was the first female professor at the University of Alberta, and both Cynthia and I are very, very interested in her.
So, Pamela,
Yes.
tell me a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and how you got into writing articles.
Okay. Well, my background, I've always been an educator of one sort or another, so I taught public school, I've taught adult education, I've taught at the university, and so that's a big part of my life, and not just the teaching but the learning that goes with teaching. But I also have always loved to write. I come from a family of writers and storytellers, and I've probably been writing stories since I was in early elementary school. Yeah. So, I think it was 2014, I had my first ever published article in what's now Edify magazine here in Edmonton. It used to be Avenue Edmonton. And it's kind of a rush to get published, I have to say. I would call myself a generalist, but I realize most of my writing has been about people who push the envelope. I'm always really interested in people who look at the status quo and say, well, that's kind of boring. Let's try it this way. Because I know it's not easy to step outside the box and do things in a different way. So most of the articles I've written have been about people who did that. So I also really enjoy hearing people's stories. Most of the time, these have been people who are still alive, so they can tell me their stories. When I was writing about Geneva Misener, it was the first time that I had done any kind of writing about a historical figure who was not around to tell me her life story. So that was a challenge, but also totally fascinating. And I'll answer the last question first, because I had never heard of Geneva Misener before last summer at almost exactly this time. So a friend of mine and I were out for a walk around the University of Alberta campus, and we saw a little historical marker, just a very small one, at the sidewalk side of an empty lot. So we stopped because we're both interested in history, and we're reading this. Now, keeping in mind, so she works at the university now, I have worked at the university, we've both been students at the U of A, and she looks up at me and she said, this was the first female professor at the University of Alberta. Have you ever heard of her? I said, no. And you? No. Now, we're both like, this is odd. How is it that there's no, like, Geneva Misener statue, Geneva Misener building, Geneva Misener library? Coincidentally, that afternoon I went home and I was just looking through email, and I get a newsletter from the Edmonton Arts Council. And at the bottom of the newsletter, it said that the Edmonton Heritage Council, through, it's called ECAMP, which stands for Edmonton Community as Museum Project, we're looking for articles about the history of work in Edmonton. And I was like, well, I think I might have a topic here. But as a freelancer, you have to go off and do your research first, because there might be nothing there. And if you pitch an idea and then you realize there's nothing to write about. So I started to look for references, just Googling Geneva Misener. I didn't come up with very much. Strangely, and one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is because I found online, Geneva Misener vest, cap, and mittens at Yarniversity, right? So I had very few leads going into it, but I found a woman. Her name is Anne Hall. She's a professor emerita at the U of A. And in a edition, I guess I would call it, of the New Trail, which is the alumni magazine, at the back they always have like little announcements of projects that alumni are doing, and it said Anne Hall was writing a book about Geneva Misener. So I'm like, there's a resource. So I look for it. I can't seem to find it anywhere on Amazon but I find an email from Anne Hall, still a U of A email. And it turns out she's a neighbor of mine. And I said, did you publish that book? And if so, I'd really like to get a copy of it. She said, well, I didn't actually ever publish it. And I said, oh dear, why? And she said, well, here's the thing. She said, I did a bunch of research for a year. And she said, Geneva's kind of a mystery in terms of, she said she didn't leave behind any correspondence, any journals, any diaries, any personal writings of any sort. And she said, I did find some of her family members. Apparently she had a journal, which the family destroyed, right? And we both went, oh, could you do that? But she just was not anybody who, well, she kept a lot of things private. So this Anne Hall said to me, well, she said, you're welcome to all of my notes. And I'm like, oh, really? So I went over, she had a couple of boxes full of things that she had discovered about Geneva Misener. Then I discovered newspapers.com. I will tell you, newspapers.com was a treasure trove for finding old articles about Geneva Misener. Yes. So all the way back to one, now keeping in mind, she came to the U of A in 1913. It was the first year that the U of A was granting degrees. So she was in from the ground up as a classics professor, which was really unusual for women at that time. So there were other university professors who were women later on, but they were in fields like home economics. That's where women are supposed to be. So she came to the U of A in 1913, but I found a newspaper article. She grew up in Ontario, about her graduation from Queen's University in 1898. She had been a stellar student. So she was winning gold medals in classics and Latin and Greek and all that kind of thing. She had followed in the footsteps of one of Canada's first female university graduates who taught at her high school and got her interest in classics. She went to the University of Chicago, which is where she got her PhD. And her, of course, all-male dissertation group were like, oh my God, she's incredible, right? She can aspire to the greatest positions in the country. When she came to the U of A, she'd already worked for 10 years. She was 36 when she came, and so she had been at a couple of universities, and then, interestingly enough, and there were lots of blanks where she came back to Canada. So she'd been in the U.S. for quite a long time, and it seems as though she taught at maybe a private school in Winnipeg. And it was like a high school, so it wasn't a university, and so that was very odd. You know, usually when people are on the fast track, particularly when they're brilliant, they don't go from university. But anyway, and then she popped up here. So, you know, I found, you could just imagine her, like, as I say, I had to fill in a lot of the blanks, so I thought, well, she had to have come by train. She probably came to the station here in Old Strathcona. You know, how did she get down to the U of A? Because there were not all that many. I guess she probably would have gone on the streetcar. But then when she got there weren't even all that many buildings at the U of A that time. There seemed to be some suggestion that she had lived in one of the residences. But when she got here, so she was in the classics department. And of course, the only woman, not only in the class department, but on the whole campus. So yes, my imagination came alive with, like, what was she like? And even the newspaper articles that I found about her, they were mostly fairly factual, right? So, you know, she gave a talk about this to this group of people. But as newspaper style started to change, I noticed in the writing. So I did find a couple of interviews that people at the Edmonton Bulletin and the Edmonton Journal had done with her in her home, where they were describing her mannerisms. So, you know, she had twinkling brown eyes, and she was small in stature and with a ready smile, that kind of thing. So, yeah, she is still in many ways a mystery to me, because there is that private part of her life that she did not share. But who she was came out in her work. And not only in her work, but in all the other things she was involved with as well. She disproved with research, which gladdened my academic heart. They had said that one of the reasons that women shouldn't be allowed to vote was because they were less literate than men. And she was like, you know what? I got research here that says that's not true. So, yes, she was also not only for the vote, but equal pay for equal work with men, and perhaps most controversially at the time, that women should be able to have a career and a home life, which included marriage and children if they wanted them. And I read one source that said at that time, so that would have been around 1919, 1920, even some of the women who were campaigning for the vote for women would have found that highly controversial, right? If you were a woman, even if you had worked, you were expected to marry, and if you were expected to marry, then you were also expected to have children, and then a job was not compatible with that. So she was fighting uphill battles all the time. So she was also instrumental in establishing the Canadian Federation of University Women, which is still alive today. But there's a wonderful historic photograph of her with her co-founders in Winnipeg, and of course they have the beautiful hats and the long dresses, but oh, they are a formidable looking group. Like, you were not going to mess with any of those of those women. So yes, she must have had, you know, a very big streak of steel in her, and yet she just, to me, she kept on doing the right thing. It was like when she saw an injustice, it was almost as though she said, this isn't right, I have to do something about this. And she did. Yeah. So, like I say, also she was involved in other things outside of academia, so she was very interested in the role of women in sports. Once again, so apparently she traveled with the U of A women's, I believe it was their hockey team and their basketball team. And then she was instrumental in getting women into the Alberta Minor Hockey Association. Yeah. And she became the president of the women's league. She donated the Misener Cup for the championship for women. So, yeah, she was a force to be reckoned with. Absolutely. One other story that I found, which I couldn't include in the article that I eventually wrote, was she went to bat for a young man he was 18 years old. He was delivering milk, once again, right over here in Old Strathcona. And there were many children on the street playing, and he was trying to drive down the street, and he hit and killed a 5-year-old girl. Long story short, the judge basically threw the book at him, charged him with manslaughter, and tossed him into the Fort Saskatchewan jail. So this was a kid, no criminal record. It was obviously not intentional. Kid ran into the street, and he was, now I don't know anything about the Fort Saskatchewan jail at that time, another interesting thing to look into, but Geneva Misener heard about this, and she was like, this is not right to put an 18-year-old, well, she called him a boy, an 18-year-old boy into a prison with hardened criminals. She started a petition. She got 5,000 signatures on the petition to get this kid out of prison. And it took them 7 months, but she eventually got him out.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's give this a
All
shot.
righty.
All right. So we are walking over to where Geneva has a plaque.
Yes. Where this is actually a very interesting story about her home. So it appears that she lived in residence for a fair number of years, and then after her father died in Ontario, her mother came to live with her, and it seems as though that's when she decided she needed a permanent residence.
Okay.
So she bought a home. And then later, she had a brother, well, she had several brothers, but her brother, once again back in Ontario, was splitting up with his wife. Okay. And he had 4 children. And she said, well, he had 2 daughters, 5 and 3 they were, keeping in mind that she was 49 at this time. So she said, well, I will take the older of the 2 girls, and one of her brothers was going to take the 2 boys. Well, of course, this left the 3-year-old, and apparently for a little while the 5-year-old lived with her, and then the mother said, you know, my 3-year-old daughter misses her sister, so will you take her too? So she did. So suddenly not only is she an academic at the university, and of course she has her fingers in all these other pies around women's rights and women's sports, but now she's got an elderly mother and a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Wow.
So, yes, I mean, she was living proof that you could have it all.
Yes.
I mean, it must have been, again, she just did what was right, because I'm sure that there were people who were cocking their tongues at, because now she had added single parenthood to her long list of things that were maybe not quite acceptable,
Right, yes.
at that time. But those girls, they pop up in the newspaper articles as well. So they went to school at, well, what is now Old Strathcona here. And when she would, so this was when the girls were in high school and university. She took a sabbatical and went to California and enrolled the girls in high school and Berkeley University, the older one, and then she took them traveling after her sabbatical was over.
Wow.
So, yeah, those girls had a very full life with her. And one of the tiny things that I noticed, Anne Hall had found, I guess Queen's University at the time was asking its alumni academics to write an annual report, which she continued to do when she came from the U of A. And at the bottom, it asked, sort of like, what are your hobbies and other interests? And she said 2 words: my nieces.
Aww.
So they were important to her.
Yeah. Nice.
And there was a group who tried to save Geneva Misener's home for, and unfortunately, it was. The strange thing is that there is nothing there, as we will see in a minute. It's just basically an empty lot.
Okay.
So they knocked down her house, I guess, maybe thinking that they would put something in its place, but it doesn't look like that ever came to fruition. I guess the other place too that is associated with her is Rutherford House, because she knew the Rutherfords. Okay. So she socialized there. Yeah. I always like to think what it would have looked like when she was here, because the first buildings, the old arts building, she probably lectured there. Also the what used to be, don't think they are residences anymore, the old brick, like trying to remember the names of them, so like Pamela Hall. Right. Is it Mackenzie Hall? Can't remember, but anyway, those were some of the first buildings on the U of A campus, so certainly she would have lectured there.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so we are coming up. Oh, right, I misspoke. There is something now on the lot. Okay. This is not her original house, this brick building. There are photos of her original house much smaller. Right, yeah. But yeah, so here we are, coming up to one of the few signs on the U of A campus.
Okay, let's have a look at this sign.
Okay, so it says 11013 90th Avenue was the home from 1926 to 1946 of Dr. Geneva Misener, first woman professor at the University of Alberta, appointed in 1912 to the Department of Classics and retired in 1945. I'll tell you a story about the retirement. Okay. She served as university advisor to women students as a member of the University Senate. Was a strong advocate for women's education She was Alberta delegate at the conference that founded the Canadian Federation of University Women in 1919. She also actively promoted women's hockey in Alberta. 2 scholarships funded by Dr. Misener at the university are still awarded. And actually there are 2 more at Queen's University where she graduated, and also one given by the CFUW, Canadian Federation of University Women. So yes, this was where my friend and I stood and looked at each other and said, why have we never heard of this woman?
Yeah.
And there's much more to the story. So yes, it says that she retired in 1949. This is how history can be, cleaned up into something that sounds so clean and factual. She did not want to retire in 1945. No. Unfortunately, post-World War II and probably even in the years leading up to the end of the war, the classics department was experiencing less enrollment. Faculties like medicine and science and the technology related fields were becoming more well populated, I guess, with students. So yes, they decided that maybe it was time for Geneva to shuffle off, since she wouldn't have very many students, and she fought them. Yes, it was Geneva Misener, right? What would you expect her to do? Unfortunately, she lost. And after that, she disappears out of Edmonton and she pops up again in Vancouver. She had always apparently liked Vancouver, and the fact that she was quote unquote retired didn't stop her from her work with the Canadian Federation of University Women, or she was giving community-based lectures on classics. And then as a woman of 73, she took off on a 10-month world tour, which of course at the time would have been by steamship. Right. And she went all over to look at social innovations in places like Asia, and it was quite amazing what she did after her retirement. So in terms of my personal history, well, I grew up in Edmonton. I'm a long-term Edmontonian. I grew up on the north side in a community called Prince Charles, which is still there. I went to Sherbrooke Junior High School, which is no longer there, Ross Shepherd High School, and then here to the U of A to do my Bachelor of Education. I taught in Strathcona County for a long time. I've taught at Northwest College. I then, as is the way it seems with people who have teaching degrees, they think maybe they need to get a master's and go into administration. I did that. I did not like administration. I miss the students and the teaching and the learning that goes along with it. So although I got an MEd, I really still loved the teaching. So eventually I thought about doing a PhD, and I had a good piece of advice from a professor here who said, go somewhere else to do your PhD. Find out how they do things. I didn't go very far. I went to the University of Calgary, but it was night and day. They have a very different way of looking at things. They're all about pushing the envelope, which is of course of interest to me. So when I came back from doing a PhD, once again I discovered that academia wasn't really the life for me, and I did a number of other jobs in and around Edmonton. So I worked for the provincial government, I worked for the Faculty of Extension here at the U of A. So in terms of the writing, again, as I mentioned earlier, that was always a kind of a side interest. Teaching, I suppose, is my true passion, but always I'm interested in
fascinating people. And so some of the people that I have written about, one comes to mind because probably there's another article coming up with her.
Okay.
Her name is Margaret Nazon, Nazon. She lives in a tiny village in the Northwest Territories called Sikachik. She is Gwich'in, First Nation. And I met her at, it's called Adaka, Aadaka, and it's a circumpolar Indigenous Peoples Arts Festival.
Oh, cool.
Now she is a beater, which probably is not too surprising.
And by beater, you mean
B-E-A-D. Yes, B-E-A-D, yes. But she used her traditional beading skills to do interpretations of Hubble Space Telescope photographs. You can look her up at margaretnazon.com. And so I wrote an article about her for the Walrus magazine, which is probably my most proud moment, because the Walrus is a national publication. And I'm going back to see Margaret in August. She not only is a beater, but she is a traditional fish camp fisher person. And because she runs this fish camp, and because, well, like many Indigenous groups, the Gwich'in are starting to lose some of these traditional ways of doing things, she gets lots of visitors at her camp. So I am going up, and I will be camped out on the shores of the Mackenzie River, yes, for a week to experience traditional Gwich'in fishing.
Oh, that is so
yes,
cool.
And so that's an article that I hope to be able to pitch to a place like maybe Canadian Geographic or the Globe and Mail, and hope that they have interest.
Oh, that is amazing. I love that.
I also wrote an article on 82nd Avenue and 104th. You will find a marker that says Pride Corner.
Okay.
And this is where a group of LGBTQ plus people decided they would take a stand against a fundamentalist preacher who was very anti LGBTQ people.
Yeah.
And in a very short period of time, they actually managed to get the city to create a marker calling that corner Pride Corner.
Oh, wonderful.
So they were, I was so impressed by what they had been able to do. And once again, it's this pushing of the envelope where you can't accept the way things are and you need to do something about it.
Yeah.
So yes, I wrote an article about them, and that was nationally published by a online magazine which deals with the issues of the queer community.
All right, Pamela, I just want to say thank you so much for meeting with me today.
You're welcome.
And for, having coffee and being able to talk about Geneva Misener. That's been really educational and inspiring. And so I'm just going to say thank you, and I hope that we get a chance to do this again. I'd love to talk to you later on when you're finished your article about the Gwich'in artist. I think that's really cool.
I think so too.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Cynthia.
See you guys.
Okay, bye-bye.